So the question that we are asking, is monetization a boon or a curse? I would like to welcome our first guest, Mr. Nilesh Shah. Thank you very much, Mr. Shah, for joining us right here on The Big Fight. Let me start by asking you that very question. Is monetization a boon or a curse for India and the Indian economy?
It is a boon if we monetize assets to create new assets. And it could become a curse if we monetize our assets to fund revenue expenditure. If we go to the history, Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister of United Kingdom in 1979. At that point of time, UK economy was growing negatively. She took many tough decisions, but one of them was asset monetization. She actually sold off those assets which were in the pockets of government. Every company starting with British, whether British Gas, Power, Telecom, Airways was sold off. And that money was used to build new assets and also reducing debt of the government. Those decisions helped United Kingdom economy to come back on track and start growing again. So we must use this asset monetization to create newer assets rather than funding revenue expenditure.
Mr. Shah, how can one do that? How can the government do that?
So essentially, Sanket, if we see today, the public-private partnership which was introduced earlier didn't take off because project execution was becoming risky due to various approval delays, due to land acquisition problem, and so on and so forth. That higher risk premium resulted into demand of higher return by investors. But if you are selling off an existing highway, then it is already constructed. You just have to collect that toll. It is much, much safer. And hence the return expectation of investors is much lower. We should create a cycle where government takes the risk of building infrastructure and then monetizes it by selling it or leasing it to the investors who will demand a much lower rate of return. And that money should be invested in developing new infrastructure. We have built highways, but the village roads are still behind. We have decongested highways, but our intercity roads still are congested. So we should use this money to build newer assets which will help grow India at a higher pace.
Now, Mr. Shah, how about your response on this fear that this will essentially create a situation where the private sector, see, they're not going to own, they're not buying these assets. They're only taking it on lease, which basically means that it's not theirs to keep. Thus, there will always, or there can always be this feeling where, or this risk where the private sector is going to milk this asset dry and not really care about further asset building. I'm just talking about a risk, a potential risk. How would you respond to this?
See, there are so many investors today in the world where interest rates are near zero level who all are searching for yields. Pension funds, endowment funds, sovereign funds want to invest in longer term yielding assets. And if we can provide them our infrastructure assets with a reasonable surety of return, they'll be more than happy to invest in India. Today, we have also seen crackdown by China on technology company, which has caused massive losses to investors. Even that money we can attract to India if we offer them good projects. And using that money, government should build newer assets. That way we can create a cycle where with limited capital, we will be able to build more infrastructure, more assets.
Mr. Shah, what about the capability of the private sector? See, right now the government has a vision or a wish list that they would be able to monetize all these assets for 6 lakh crore rupees at the end of 2025. Now, you know the situation of the economy. Do you think that the private sector would be able to pay this much? Or will the government
Definitely.
be able to earn this much?
In today's world where interest rates are low and liquidity is high, there is problem of excess liquidity. Someone took a screenshot of a blank computer screen and sold it as an NFT at thousands of dollars. So there is excess liquidity which we have to tap. Now we must provide confidence to the investors that these assets will provide return to you. so that the risk premium comes down and we are able to borrow at a cheaper rate. Any infrastructure which we can build at a cheaper rate will increase India's competitiveness. And I'll give you a small example, Sanket. Today, our goods train run at 25 kilometers an hour on an average. Some of the marathon runners will run faster than our goods train. This has increased India's logistics cost by 4 to 5%. Now, that's why we are not competitive in exports. That's why import can happen. Now, if we can build a dedicated freight corridor equivalent railway track across the country and shift our cargoes which are moving on roads to railway and make our industry competitive, that will create a completely new level of growth.
All right. Mr. Shah, we asked this question, monetization, a boon or a curse, on the Coup app. And one of our viewers has a question for you. Utkarsh says, isn't National Monetisation Pipeline basically a clearance sale of assets built over the last 70 years? And I'll tell you why this question becomes important, Mr. Shah, because you gave the example of the United Kingdom and Margaret Thatcher. There is also a counter example or an experience of Russia and the oligarchs, that this could create a situation like that as well.
So in the Russian case, what had happened was that the shares were distributed among investors who had no idea what they collected. If my memory serves me correctly, Gazprom, which was 25% owner of known gas reserves in the world, was available at $2.5 billion valuation because investors didn't know what they were selling to informed buyers. Now, in our case, we are not selling it to uninformed investors. We are selling it to informed investor assets in a competitive manner. In Russia's case, buyers were buying it from uninformed investors. In our case, we will be giving it to people with full knowledge what value of this asset is in a competitive manner. Now, let's not think that we are monetizing 70 years of assets. Let's think it that we are building next 70 years of assets with this money. Otherwise, our goods train 5 years down the line will run at 12.5 kilometers per hour, and after 10 years will run at 5 kilometers an hour.
Interesting. All right, Mr. Nilesh Shah, thank you very much for joining us with your views.